Hello and welcome to this edition of Inside Tacoma. I'm your host, Randall Lewis. Our guest for our conversation today, Pierce County Council Member Derek Young. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's been a while since you've been with us, but you represent a big chunk of Tacoma, so we need to check in with you periodically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plus, we all live in Pierce County, and you guys have been in the news recently. There's been this golf course thing that you've been dealing with.
I heard something about that.
You did? Okay. And that, now, I don't think anybody in Pierce County, regardless of whether they golf or not, and I don't, would be unhappy that there is Chambers Bay Golf Course now versus a gravel pit that was there before. It's not even a functional gravel pit anymore. So that asset is something tremendous that the county has brought to the entire county. It's certainly a regional attraction. It did attract a major United States golf tournament. But it was getting in the news for other reasons now, right?
Yeah, so there's long been this plan to put a resort development there, and there's been a couple different proposals that have come through the years, but nothing has really panned out. And the reason for it is both to encourage more people to come in and golf the course, to support more rounds played from people out of the area, but also as a way to generate some revenue from the property. This was always seen as in part a economic development project. You know, if it was just to put another public golf course, it wouldn't have been quite that fancy. So this was the culmination of that effort. That there was some bumps along the way, but ultimately the council decided to move forward.
Okay, and so we'll see some kind of development occur there with a pro shop and restaurant and that kind of thing, and some rooms that people could stay in.
Yeah, not just any restaurant. Right now, Tom Douglas is actually set up for it. So if you're a fan of, if you're kind of a foodie, that's his first restaurant, I think, in South Sound. And then, it should be a very nice resort. And then the one kind of controversial part is these golf villas, which will be converted, hopefully in the future, into hotel suite stays. But in the immediate future, will be more like multifamily housing.
All right. And there was, of course, a lot of people who don't golf use that facility because of the trail system that's right through there. Clear up what the question is about the trails. Somehow does this development affect the trail system in the golf course?
It does, but it's a fairly small segment. It's basically the portion where, if you can picture the park development and the hillside where it's going, or the resort development with the hillside where it's going, in order to push it down so that essentially from the street you see over the buildings, it does impact that segment of the trail, which will need to be moved. And so there are plans to move it. I'm told that they think they can do it in a way that's will be very nice and still enjoyable, but that upper trail segment will be impacted, but it will also be replaced. The lower trail segment will always remain there, and so. I think people still enjoy walking the course and walking those trails, which is, of course, one of the main reasons that we wanted to restore it from being a gravel pit, because gravel pits don't get many hikers walking through them.
Right, tend to be dangerous actually, and that's the other reason why a golf course, even a high-end one, made some sense, because there were these other uses that are there for certainly the most passive of all kind of recreation, which is walking on a trail.
Right.
So
yeah, and we do hope that the rest of the park elements that we have in the master plan will be developed along that time as well.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to get that cleared up right off the top here. One of your colleagues was on the show not too long ago, because he'd been a city council member for 8 years and then recently moved over. And it occurred to me after he visited that happens a lot. There actually seems to be two groups of folks on the Pierce County Council, the 7 of you on the County Council. They either come from city government, in your case, Gig Harbor, in the case of the person who was here, and at least 2 of your colleagues, Tacoma City Council. Then the others seem to come out of Olympia. They've had legislative careers, and then they decide that I'm going to go back home and I got tired of the drive or whatever, and I just want to be on the county council for a while. I keep doing public policy. I'm guessing that these folks bring different sets of views as to how things ought to be done. The legislature is certainly not at all like any city or county council in terms of how it governs itself.
Yeah, it's interesting you point that out. I mean, we actually joke about how even though we have parties, that there's really the local government versus state government caucuses, and we put Doug Richardson in ours. He was former mayor in Lakewood,
right?
As well as the two former Tacoma council members, and myself coming from Gig Harbor, and that is different than the former legislators. There's a couple things that I think make our experiences very different. One is when you're in city government, very often your relationship with the county can be tense, to put it mildly. So very often, their land use and public safety and all sorts of other policies impact what you're doing in city government. The folks that are in state government, their relationship with counties has been all about giving us orders. And so, usually it's basically counties go off and do this, do that, because we are subdivisions of the state.
And by the way, no money.
Yeah, by the way, no money to come with it, lots of unfunded mandates. And they're not used to taking that sort of direction. And in some cases, the transition can be a little bumpy, quite frankly. I often have to remind my colleagues, one of the reasons I spend a lot of time as co-chair of the Washington State Association of Counties Legislative Committee is that because we often are trying to explain, here's the things that we don't want you to order us to do, because my obligation is to then do that. You don't get to pick and choose what laws you obey when you're a county council member. So our job is to implement the state's wishes, and sometimes that's a difficult task. The other thing is that it's the issues that we have experience working in. So those of us that come from city government, obviously land use is a big deal for us, roads, infrastructure type issues, kind of the meat and potatoes of local government. Those are issues that we're very familiar with, whereas that is something that, quite frankly, the state really doesn't do as directly. The legislature funds a lot of things, but they don't engage directly in local zoning policy, right, and so things like that.
Sometimes they try, and we try to remind them that they shouldn't.
Yes. In fact, this last session, there was a lot of that going on,
right,
and with good intentions. We have right, a housing crisis, and I agreed with much of the direction, but also it's important to allow us some local discretion so we can react to our local needs.
Right, and in the end, that all did work out the right way.
But I think so, yeah.
But that's an interesting take on, because another one of your colleagues from the county was here not too long ago, and that was the county auditor, mm-hmm, who talked about one of the issues that she was dealing with was the fact that, which I didn't even really be aware of it after all these years, was that the state pays only for some elections, yes, that the county has to run on the state's, yeah, behalf, and not others at all. Yes. Remind us how that works again. Which elections, is it this year's election that the state's going to help pay for, or is it only the ones when the legislators are on the ballot?
Right, and that's the odd part, is that they pay for the ones that when they're not on the ballot. So they'll pay for the off-year elections, although all of our municipal entities will also participate, but they're not paying their fair share when they're on the ballot. Which has been a particular frustration. At the very least, they need to cover the state's own election costs. We all in local government cover our own election costs, but basically that cost gets shared amongst all the participants in those elections. So it can have a significant impact on not only county budgets, but on city budgets as well. As an association, we've been supportive of the Auditors Association's efforts to try to get that election cost sharing built back up. In fact, Julie Anderson, the auditor, and I have just had an editorial that appeared in a couple different newspapers talking about the need for them to basically pay their bills. In a lot of cases, and it's not just on election costs, it's a myriad of responsibilities. The biggest one that is, I think, shocking to me is public defense. You're entitled by the Constitution, anytime you're charged with a crime, to have a public defender, represent you. And if you're basically unable to pay, in most cases that's the case. Crime tends to be not something that people that are well off are doing, and so as a result, about 94% of those costs are paid for by your county government, and only 96%, and only 4% by the state. That's different than almost every other state in the union. The state doesn't pay for hardly any. So you end up with sort of a justice by geography type approach, where if you get collared in Grant County versus King County, the two systems of justice could not be more different. And that very much impacts how you're going to react to those charges. So for me, it's not just a matter of, this is impacting my ability to deliver services in the unincorporated area or behavioral health services to everyone. It's a matter of access to justice. And for a supposedly progressive state, it's a shocking abdication of that responsibility.
Well, and it's also very similar. I mean, as you're describing that, how, say Grant County versus Pierce County, and how a person in the same economic situation in those two counties might face that issue differently and the result differently. That's the exact same issue that the Supreme Court ruled against the state on regarding school funding, which of course is different than criminal defense because it is the paramount duty of the state of Washington to pay for K-12 education. But it was the disparity between rich counties and poor counties that made the case for the Supreme Court. And we just got through with multi-year attempts by the legislature to fix that problem under this court order. It would seem that the state is setting itself up for yet another legal battle at some point in time, if access to justice is widely different from one county to another in Washington.
That's exactly right, and quite frankly, we're headed down that road. So right now there's a case. It was actually brought by a third party. The ACLU is suing in Grays Harbor County, and this is over juvenile, a particular narrower type case there. And basically what it's saying is that you don't provide adequate defense for juvenile justice. So they sued the state, but they also, I believe, brought in Grays Harbor County. We are going to join in amicus on basically saying that's correct. On a narrow focus, basically saying it's the state's responsibility to ensure that adequate defense is provided. When you read the Gideon case, the rather famous Supreme Court case, it put the obligation squarely on the shoulders of the states, and it's a non-delegable duty. So we're talking constitutional, civil rights types issues. So I think if this gets into a court, they're going to rule that yes, the state does have this obligation. We've actually made this request for several years now in the Olympia as an association, and basically told them, look, we're kind of tired at this point of asking. They've made no progress. In fact, this session we thought we would make some progress. We got zero. And so as a result, I think we're heading towards litigation with the state, but we'll probably use this as a test case first. But our association is absolutely unanimous on this. When we had a vote a year ago to establish a legal fund to start, heading this direction, research the case, we require pretty much everyone at our conference has a chance to vote on it. It was unanimous. Every single commissioner and executive and council member in the room voted yes. So
wow, that does say a lot. I mean, that's even more probably unlikely to occur than with the 281 cities that are in Washington State. Because you're talking about a county of like King County with 1.5 million, actually close to 2 million people now. And then what is it, Wahkiakum or Soton, which has barely 50,000.
Yeah.
So they're very, very different places.
We're probably one of the more diverse interest groups you'll ever find. I mean, you have Republicans and Democrats, West Side, East Side, dry counties, then rainforests. Our needs are very different. But on this, it's a duty handed to us by the state, and like a lot of the duties they give us, that it doesn't come with funding. And so we're starting to push back on a lot of those. So the important thing is we're also saying, we don't mind you making the policies. If you want us to do something, we're agnostic on what the policy is. The elections, for example, they just piled on same-day registration. I happen to think it's a great idea. There's some others that have a different opinion of it. But we're saying we'll do it, just don't not fund it. And unfortunately, they didn't fund it. So we added, a couple $1 million potential cost for Pierce County taxpayers coming up in the 2020 election.
Okay, they are paying for the postage on the ballots, right?
That was actually, we were surprised, and pleasantly so. But that just goes to show that the fact that we were surprised is probably not a good sign that their partners are feeling well treated. But I was pleased to see that. Okay.
Now back to you personally and in your district, which, as I said, straddles the Narrows, and you came out of Gig Harbor as a city council member, and Gig Harbor has growth issues. It's certainly a thriving community with a lot of identity issues that it wants to protect its unique identity and its access to its shoreline and all those cool things that make Gig Harbor a great place to go visit. And then you got the north end of Tacoma, very urban, established kind of place with a lot of very different kinds of urban issues. But you don't actually have to be responsible for any of those because there's city council members that deal with that kind of thing. So do people dial just looking for elected officials, or they remember that you were on the city council once in Gig Harbor and he could solve this one for me, or he must know something? I mean, how are your constituent relations divided between people who you really can't help because they're city government issues versus county issues?
It is funny because people, the county-wide services that we provide, people don't immediately think of those that often. So when they struggle with them, they don't necessarily know to call me. But when it's their local issues, a pothole in the street or issue with the police department or, land use issues very often, they'll sometimes call, but they're not quite sure if I can do anything about it. And usually they're right, I can't. And so I obviously defer to my partners then at the district level. Councilmember Ribson, represents much the same district. Robert Toms and I have a little bit of overlap. In fact, with the replacement, Justin Camerata, he was the small sliver that's both in the 7th County Council District and also Roberts District. So at one point I had 2 Tacoma councils in there. But in terms of what we actually do for the city of Tacoma and why people get that a little confused, it's behavioral health issues. We provide human services, housing, regional land use issues, criminal justice system. If you're any felony and above is handled by our Superior Court, and all are prosecuted by the prosecutor's office. Public defenders are provided by the county. So a lot of services that are more kind of your general government and are provided either on a countywide basis or on behalf of the state. So I always tell people, if you ever notice watching Law and Order and they say the state is represented by so-and-so, that's a local district attorney. We have the same thing here where they're literally carrying out responsibilities on behalf of the state. So then there's the ones that we just provide. So emergency management, for example. When the city of Puyallup hears their lahar warnings once a month, that's actually run by the county emergency management folks. But those are not the duties that come to mind right away for everyone. Then we have kind of a unique partnership that I actually really like this setup, and it's in public health. Public health is usually a county responsibility, but we have a unique city-county partnership in that the city of Tacoma is not only partners financially, but also has membership on the board. So we work together on those issues. And then, lastly, transit. Transit, and in the old days was Tacoma City Transit, but now we have it's not quite countywide. It's the public
actually shrunk a little bit.
Yeah, it actually shrunk. I was on the board at the time. It was very frustrating, but we do have a multi-jurisdiction transit agency, and so we try to look out for each other there as well. So it's a matter of looking for a lot of partnerships very often, and it may not always be really obvious. I would even point out that the issue that was down at Point Ruston, where the development was stalled on the Ruston side, ultimately it was actually our county executive who helped get that a little bit unstuck and had Ruston and Tacoma working together a little more to try to get that project moving and make sure that the bonds that were taken out to pay for the infrastructure that was necessary are going to get repaid. So.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about public health for a minute, because I don't know if the health department is still operating under the same interlocal agreement, but there was an update to it since I've worked for the city of Tacoma, where we kind of formalized the pay-to-play kind of process that exists. Tacoma actually does financially contribute, and that is the reason why we get board seats. I believe 2 that we get on the board. But that was opened up to other cities. I mean, it was not just supposed to be Tacoma and Pierce County. There is a seat that's developed for other cities, but they don't actually have to pay for that.
Right.
But there's a process that they could, if they wanted more representation, they could pay a certain amount to the health department system and get a seat. That seems to have worked really well over the years. I know there are folks from smaller cities that have been on that health board seat that represents the other cities of Pierce County. who really get into the issue, because I see them at other meetings that aren't related to public health at all, and they talk about the health department and what the health department's been doing. It is an active organization, cutting edge in many ways in the state of Washington, and provides. It's one of the, I think you're right. It's one of those services that people forget you have at the county level, except when you absolutely need it.
Yes.
And then it's, oh my God, where's the health department building again? It is a vital countywide public service.
Vital records, you might say.
Yes.
Public health is one of those things where it's often not noticed until it is, and it usually because something bad has happened.
Yeah.
So either you have a measles outbreak, and someone has to perform the task of retracing the path of this person to try to contain the outbreak. To foodborne illnesses, when you see a restaurant, that's been closed, it's because we have a public health department. Environmental health is one of those things that a lot of people just don't think about, but is super critical, especially in the North End, for example. The folks that tell you whether or not it's safe to dig in your area because of the Asarco plume is the public health department. And if you go out clamming or fishing or just swimming in the Puget Sound, one of the first things you should do is check with the public health department to find out if it's safe. If there's a closure, it's usually through us. Water quality is another one that people don't realize who that is, but somebody has to say, I've taken samples of this and it's fine. I actually at some point in this second term of mine, before I'm done on the council, want to try to reach out to my old city friends and say, you should really think about being part of this for a couple reasons. One, we're short on frankly revenue. But compared to our peers in pretty much every other county, our investments in what we call foundational public health services, the ones that we don't get a grant or a contract for to provide that service, and it's sort of can be a number of different things. It's small and it shows. So I'd like to see if one of the ways we can build that up is not only additional investment from the county, maybe the city of Tacoma, but also from Puyallup, from Gig Harbor. As you mentioned, Mayor Pat Johnson from City of Buckley has been on the board at least since I've been around for the last 10 years. So and she's done a tremendous job. Her voice is not only valued there, but it provides a perspective for that rural area that often gets lost. One of the most important places for public health is in areas like rural areas and like the Key Peninsula. Most people out there are on some sort of well and have some sort of septic system, and those are things that need to be inspected and checked and taken care of by the health department. And if something bad happens, it's often because that public health system has failed. So.
That's interesting. And the other thing that I know recently has become more discussed at the health department level, and there's been a couple of these, I believe, done in Pierce County, is something new called health assessments. I mean, we do environmental impact statements. Now we're going to be doing health impact statements,
right?
For major projects, right? That could conceivably have not just environmental impacts, but could have some health impacts on the community. This is kind of a new area for health departments, but I assume Pierce County is not pioneering here.
I would say on the cutting edge, but maybe not pioneering. I think this is something that's becoming increasingly common, especially as we become, just as a nation, more aware of the impacts of environmental health and the impacts of industry on our health. So air quality is a big one. Right. So we've long had this attainment issue in Pierce County. Just part of it's just topographic and meteorological, but also based on some legacy industries that were around, and we can actually track how many kids are going to be impacted by their asthma as a result of this particular type of pollution. The first time we actually used it, we actually just requested it. It was something that we wanted Tacoma to take a look at and consider in the environmental impact statement scoping work that was being done for the old methanol project. Oh, yeah. That was one where I stumbled across, basically, here's what the effects of methanol production can be, and one of them is benzene poisoning. And there was a big one in, I think it was Oklahoma, a number of years ago, and I kind of went, And we'd been talking about this idea of a health impact assessment at that time. And so, we kind of all had been discussing this and finally decided, let's try this the first time here. But then there's other policies as well. So when you're developing your land use plan, we know that the way our built environment works very much impacts people's health. And we can see it in our public health data. As you move through Pierce County block to block, you can see wild discrepancies between the life expectancy of someone that lives on the north part of 6th Avenue or the south part of 6th Avenue. And that's the case kind of throughout the county. And a lot of it's built environment. So if you can walk to the store and get fresh food and have reliable transportation and feel safe in the environment, all those things are what we call social determinants of health. A lot of people think that you're healthy just based on whether or not you have access to a doctor. That's only about 20% of what determines your life expectancy and the health that you'll experience. Most of it is the rest of it around you.
Wow. So it is a big and growing issue, but as you say, the finances are probably a little low, and it strikes. It's one of those things that's common in Pierce County, isn't it? We're the second largest county in terms of population in the state of Washington, but we are not at all the second most wealthy county in the state of Washington.
Yeah, it's frustrating because because we've localized so many services. That also means that the ability to pay for things is based on it's a kind of a winner take all type economy, and so King County has done very well, but they've exported a lot of their problems, and as housing has become more unaffordable. So one thing that Councilmember Mello and I work a lot on the regional level is trying to find a housing jobs balance in our upcoming Vision 2050. It's our regional land use plan. If we can make sure that housing is adequate to the job demand that is going on in King County, we'll stop displacing so many people. Or conversely, if we can spread out some of the economic impact in this amazing economic thing that's going on in Seattle and East King County and Bellevue, Redmond, if we could see some of that spread to the other parts of the region and diversify that, we'll cut down on transportation costs, we'll help everyone here more locally, we'll generate more revenues for the government so that we can provide better services, and so on and so forth. To me, it's just a no-brainer, but obviously we have to convince our colleagues up in King County, and they're less enthusiastic.
Well, that'll be a story for another day.
Yeah.
We are out of time today, but thank you for being here.
Thanks, Ray.
Our guest has been Pierce County Councilmember Derek Young. We look forward to seeing you next time here on Inside Tacoma.